Are you ready to break free from a conventional life and achieve financial independence through your version of tiny living, but you're feeling stuck trying to figure out the money part? Does the pressure to conform to societal norms make it even more difficult to embrace an unconventional lifestyle? Well, you're in the right place. I'm Laura Lynch, host of the Less House, More Moolah podcast, where every Thursday I'll bring you captivating interviews with individuals who have successfully made the transition to tiny living. They defied expectations and are thriving in their unique lives. We'll also dive deep into industry resources to address common financial concerns on your tiny journey. Together, we'll explore the emotional and practical aspects of pursuing an alternative lifestyle. I will describe a clear framework for project planning and cash flow management. Our goal is to intentionally build financial security and make a positive impact through our alternative American dream. So gear up for an exciting and empowering journey to create a life that truly resonates with you. Let's dive into today's episode and take the first steps towards financial independence and purpose through tiny living. Hey, Jon Dowdy, thank you so much for joining the Less House, More Moolah podcast. I'm super excited to have you here today. You and I met at a tiny house show a few weeks ago where you were sharing your expertise with the tiny house community. So thanks so much for being a guest today.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was great to meet you there. A lot of great people at the show. I love being involved in the shows and stuff like that. So yeah, it's always good to meet new people and learn new ideas.
Yeah, so you are the president of SevensTransport. So tell us your backstory and your professional experience with this whole transporting thing.
So I've been transporting trailers for about 15 years since I was a teenager. So I always had a passion for it. I actually started out doing landscaping and construction, hauling equipment and stuff to the job sites. And I had such a passion for it that I started a transport company back around 2015. So I've been doing it personally about 8 years now. Started out, just doing RVs and boats and stuff like that, different type of vehicles. And it was around the same time when the tiny house market started to explode. So we picked up tiny houses and, went from there. And to date, personally, I've done over 100, 120 tiny houses personally as a driver. But my company has probably done over 400 of them total.
Wow. That's amazing. So when did the tiny houses come on your radar? Was it someone called you up out of the blue and said, hey, can you move this thing? Or how did that become an important part of your business?
Well, like I said, we had started doing a lot of RVs. And then I got a call to do a tiny house. And I'm thinking, I've seen them on TV and stuff, but never had done one at the time. And so, it was a learning experience at first, but, we fell in love with it. And, they asked us to move one. And, once we started moving them, we kind of saw why they were calling us, because it's not really a DIY type of thing. You definitely want to hire somebody to do it. So, but with our experience, we were the perfect fit for it. So we just, took it on from there.
Awesome. So tell us more about the idiosyncrasies, the very specific parts about moving a tiny house as opposed to an RV or a boat or something else that people might be used to towing.
Now, a lot of people, it's a misconception just because it has the same type of hitch style, like a regular ball hitch or gooseneck hitch. A lot of people think you can just hook up and tow it like a regular towable RV. But the difference is they're built so robust, using household materials instead of fiberglass and stuff. So they're a lot heavier, a lot taller, and they catch wind a lot easier. So we run into a lot of situations where going highway speeds or on high winds, you get a lot of sway with it. And, for the average person who's not used to dealing with that on a day-to-day basis, once the wind starts making the trailer sway, they don't really have the experience to counter it. So, we're experienced with it. We do it all day. So, we know how to handle them going down the road. So that's why another reason I said we recommend, professional help when it comes time to moving it. And also with design. So weight distribution plays a big key in making it easy to tow. So depending on who built the tiny house and how they designed different rooms and the appliances, in some situations you'll run into a lot of the weight being at the rear and not that much tongue weight. And in cases like that, it increases the sway in the trailer because you have to have an equal distribution. You want kind of a good amount of tone weight to kind of keep the trailer balanced. When you have a lot in the back and not as much in the front, it's a recipe for sway. So that's another factor.
That's so interesting. Do you, in your experience, do RV manufacturers do a better job of distributing the weight, or is that something that's been refined over time? And maybe in tiny houses, the builders aren't thinking about the towing so much. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are, with RV corporations, they're pretty big. They pump out these things by the hundreds, by the thousands, and they probably have testing sites and testing facilities where they can, test that type of stuff. But a lot of the tiny house builders, some of them are small businesses, maybe not even pumping out that many of them, so they don't have the facilities to test them. Right. And also, some of them just don't think about it. They think of more design and how to make it, as nice looking as possible, and they may not think about design. And so that comes into play with your floor plan, making sure you put, like I said, you put the right appliances where it's supposed to go, and make sure the weight is where it needs to be.
Yeah, that makes sense because the tiny home builders are really focused on what the client wants from a layout perspective, and they're not necessarily thinking about it being towed on a regular basis. Now, from what I've seen on your website, you all are only doing sort of tiny house on wheels that are either require no permit or require wide load, but you're not doing the modular ones yet. Is that right?
So we do the legal size and the oversize. Mm-hmm. We stick mainly to the ones that are, built on trailer frames. Mm-hmm. The modular homes, we don't really get into those. It all boils down to classification. So like your regular, mobile home or trailer, that somebody lives in, we don't really move those because they're classified different. Mm-hmm. But most tiny houses on wheels in this community, they're registered as RVs, a lot of them. Mm-hmm. So, we can tow those. And we're actually opening up a new sector where we're going to start doing the ones without wheels. Because a lot of our partners are starting to roll out product lines that don't have wheels, that aren't built on trailers. And so we will be able to accommodate those.
Yeah. So when you and I met each other at the show, you were talking about how you have developed some pretty good relationships with the builders. Who is it you normally hear from first? Do you hear from builders mostly who have buyers, or are you hearing from individuals that need their tiny home transported?
We hear from a mixture of both. A lot of tiny house manufacturers reach out to us directly just because when they find somebody that they like to use, they like to stick with them instead of using a bunch of random different drivers. Because like I said, this is something that you have to have experience for. And even for the regular professional RV hauler, this is a whole different ball game. Tiny houses are a different breed. So it's very hard to find a company that specializes in tiny houses and that can handle them, safely. So we get a lot of calls from manufacturers. That's where most of our repeat business comes from. But we do get, the private clients that may, buy one online or buy a private party, and we will move it that way as well.
Yeah, it's so funny. And the people that I've been talking to in the last several weeks, I'm getting this question a lot about, I'm thinking about buying some land in North Carolina, wherever, and where do I get a tiny house from and how do I get it there? And I'm like, oh, this is so interesting because people are really, thinking about all the steps of the process. And because they haven't talked to a builder yet, they don't even know how it's going to get from A to Z. So I'm glad to know you and to know that is such a specialized area that you focus on because people are going to need it.
Oh yeah, most definitely. And a lot of people don't think about it. I'm not going to say until it's too late, but they'll order it and they'll be like, okay, I'm gonna get it. I got my property. And they're like, wait, how am I going to get it? And, and they call us kind of last minute, but we're used to working under pressure. So even if a client calls us with a last minute move, we get it handled. So it's, we help walk customers through the process from beginning to end. So from the time that it comes off the production line, we can give you advice on, how to prep the site, what you should expect, how to have the limbs and stuff trimmed back for the property so we can get in and get good access. So yeah, definitely.
Awesome. So you mentioned to me before we started recording that you're going back and forth across the country. What kind of distance do you cover?
We cover the entire United States. All 50 states, including Alaska and Hawaii, we ship to.
Holy cow. Have you moved a tiny house across the ocean? How does that even work?
So we have a couple clients that have properties. They're doing like resort style properties out there in Hawaii, also in Alaska, and we'll ship it to the nearest port. So we ship it via land, via truck, to the nearest port, and then from the port it goes on the ship overseas via sea freight, and then they have to have somebody receive it on their end from the port. So it's a couple parties involved. Moves like that are definitely projects, but we accommodate them.
That's so amazing. Thanks for sharing that. That sounds pretty complicated.
Yeah, that's the main thing. When I say we ship to Hawaii, Alaska, people are like, how do you get it there? But we put it on the ship. We have a couple partners that we work with, a couple sea freight companies, and we'll forward you to them, and they'll give you the quote on their shipping, and then we'll put the pieces together and make it one transport.
So interesting. So how do you charge for your services?
So that's a very popular question. It's a lot of variables involved, from the weight, the size, the location, a bunch of different things. So we take all these into consideration because, if you're shipping from a major city or a popular state to another major city, your price is one thing, but if you're, Montana or North Dakota or somewhere where it's not a lot of population, we have to charge because it's not that much moving around, because when we're moving your tiny house, we're also moving somebody else's after and before yours. So, we have to connect the dots. So if it's in a rural area, we have to adjust for that. But we take those variables, like I said, weight and size and stuff, and we bundle it in and come up with a per mile rate. And we try to stay pretty competitive and make sure it's fair and affordable.
Awesome. So my tiny house is located in a pretty rural place and kind of up a steep road that we built, and it's tough to get to. So what kind of challenges have you seen with placing tiny homes in kind of tough to get to spots?
Yeah, that's very popular in the tiny house community because most people don't want to take a tiny house and park it in the city. They want, seclusion. They want to be somewhere rural in most cases. So that is something that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. But the way we overcome that is we ask for pictures and videos of the site. That way we know what we're getting into before the driver gets there. We give advice on cutting limbs back, making sure the easement is wide enough, stuff like that. Also traction. So you want to make sure that if it's not paved, it needs to be either gravel or compacted dirt, something that we're not going to spin tires on. And so things like that, we just, like I said, it's a project. Every move is a project. So we make sure, from A to B, A to Z, we make sure that the client knows everything they can be expected. And it's only been about maybe 2 or 3 cases out of the hundreds that we moved where we couldn't get it in the exact location. And then there are alternatives to that. They have these little equipment rentals that you can rent. I think they're called a dingo. It's almost like a small skid steer. And sometimes you can rent those locally and they can maneuver into the small, tight places. But like I said, in our career of doing this, I've only seen it maybe 2 times we couldn't get it in the spot that they wanted it.
What is your favorite tiny house transport story?
My favorite, so many of them. There's so many of them. I tend to resonate with the ones that didn't go so well. So I've had a few where they were poorly built. And I'm talking roof panels fly off sometimes if they're not built correctly, or, the siding. And that's what we're very particular about moving used units. If we're moving a used unit for you, we're going to ask a ton of questions. We want to make sure it's road legal, make sure the lights work, the tires are good, it's not 20 years old and been sitting there rotting, because this thing is going down the road at 70, 65 miles an hour, so it's got to be built for it, So I would say that those transports probably stick with me the most. I had one recently where, they had put vinyl siding on it. Most of these are built with hardy plank, which is like a cement type board, which is very durable. But this particular one had vinyl siding on it, and going down the road, it just started flying off. I stopped at Home Depot and got some boards and tried to screw it on and get it get it intact, but it didn't work. So it's very particular and very important to do your research on the builders to make sure they're building quality units that will actually make it to your place in one piece.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of variations as the industry becomes more standardized and, NOAA gains steam as far as their inspection and certification process. But I'm sure that you're still towing for people that are building their own, and maybe there's a lot of variability there.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of times I can tell from pictures, been doing it so long that I can look at the pictures and tell, how it's built or some red flags if I see any. For instance, maybe if it has shingles instead of metal roofing and how the shingles are laid or, what kind of siding it has and different things like that. So, we work with the client. We don't just, hang them out to dry. We make sure that we walk them through the process and point out anything that we may notice.
Mm-hmm. So what are the key questions and concerns you hear from your customers as you're about to tow their house across the country?
I say a big one is site prep. They want to know, hey, I want this in my backyard. Can you fit? So, we let them know if there's a fence, the fence may have to be removed depending on the size of the opening. We would prefer to have a few feet on each side of the fence. I mean, the average tiny house is about 8.5 foot wide. So, ideally you want at least like 11 or 12 foot opening, things like that. Also insurance, they want to check that, which is very important. Honestly, more people should ask about insurance than they do, because that's very important when choosing a hauler. So if that's asked of us, we can provide certificates. And so we don't really get too many crazy questions from clients. It's mainly about the site being prepped and how to prep it. And another thing they ask for is the steps. A lot of tiny houses, especially used ones, when they're like in an RV park type of setting, they'll have stairs that they have attached, like temporary steps. Mm-hmm. And they ask, can we carry them? In some cases we can, but a lot of our trucks, either they don't have pickup beds on them or they have, fuel tanks and hitches and equipment in the back of them. So we can't necessarily take a bunch of extra stuff that you may have. So, that either needs to be disassembled and placed inside, and packaged, or, find an alternative to carry the bigger stuff.
Sure. So one of the attractive elements of a tiny house on wheels is the notion that you can move it from place to place to place, kind of like an RV. Are you finding that you have customers that are moving their tiny house from place to place to place as they explore the country or move around?
That's pretty rare. For RVs, that's very popular, but for tiny houses, most of the time when a customer places it somewhere, they leave it there. Mm-hmm. I say less than 5% of our clients actually move them a second or third time. And if they do, it's, like a year or two later. Right. We've had a few travel nurses that have moved them a few times here and there, but for the most part, they keep them there for at least about a year or so. A lot of our repeat moves are mainly for manufacturers. We move show units, to different conventions and festivals. And those are really the only repeat moves that we really see.
Gotcha. So you've been around in the tiny house industry for a while. Share your perspective in terms of the growth and what types of people are going tiny. You mentioned travel nurses. Like, what have you seen in the time that you've been working in the tiny house community?
So I would say I see a lot of minimalists, because it takes a certain type of person to appreciate going tiny. Society has it where, they think everything bigger is better, but in some cases it's not. And especially, if these tiny houses have all your necessities on a smaller footprint for a fraction of the cost of traditional single family homes, I would say that it's definitely making a move. And I would say that a lot of the people we see moving these are minimalists, or either, people who want to put them on their property for their in-laws or for their kid in college to help save some money. And then besides that, besides the personal, customers, we have the business and investors who are buying them for rental properties and building resorts and, for income. And that's very lucrative business as well.
Yeah, awesome. So has your involvement in the community and what you've seen shifted your perspective on housing and kind of what you see as the norm?
Definitely. And definitely in the past year or two, seeing what the housing market has been doing, I definitely see an edge on it. as far as an advantage for tiny house living, mainly because of the cost. And I mean, I have, a good amount of children, and we lived in a fifth wheel and for about a year, on and off. And it can be tough, but it can be done, and for the fraction of the cost, it's worth it to me. So it really depends on your situation, but I definitely see the advantages of going tiny. Also, being connected to nature. Most of these places where these people are putting these tiny houses or in remote areas or in areas, in nature. And, that in itself is a benefit, being away from, the hustle and bustle of big cities. Mm-hmm. So yeah, since I've been hauling them, I definitely have leaned towards more maybe considering living in one myself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely changing people's perspective a lot since it's become so popular. The tiny house community, like the actual neighborhoods of tiny houses, seem to be growing a lot too. Are you seeing a lot of movement in and out of some of these tiny house communities that are popping up?
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of movement in them. Most people who are these tiny house communities, you mean as far as like the parks and places like that?
Yeah.
So yeah, and when people find a good park, they want to stay there. Yeah. So I'm finding that when people find a good park that they like and like the community atmosphere, they definitely want to stay there for as long as they can.
Yeah, for sure. So we definitely want you to share where people can find you and find your work. But is there anything else that you would like to share about your business and how you're helping the tiny living community?
Yeah, I want to encourage people to do their research. That's the big thing in this community is doing your research with your local, town and city with your ordinances, your bylaws, and your zoning to make sure that you can actually put this thing where you want it. And also do your research on your builders to make sure that the builder that you're going to choose, they're building quality stuff. They're keeping up on the time frame that they say they're going to do. So I say that's a big part of it. And as long as you do your due diligence, just like with any other real estate, due diligence is key. And like I said, as far as the transport goes, unless you're very trained, maybe years of CDL experience hauling, semi-trailers, I wouldn't recommend doing it yourself. And it's pretty easy to get a quote from us. You can find us online. We have a Facebook, Instagram, we're on Google. So, we're not hard to find, and we have a website as well. So, if anybody needs even just questions on the transport process and how it works, feel free to reach out to us.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure that your website is in the show notes, Jon. Thank you so much for talking to us about moving tiny houses around the country and across the ocean. That was fascinating. And we'll definitely make sure that people know how to reach you. And thank you for those key tips, because it is an area where people have to do a lot of research. And I think the municipality regulation thing is still moving and changing so fast that it's hard to keep up. But you have to make sure that your tiny house is going to be in a place where it can stay, and you don't want to have to move it multiple times. So thanks for that key tip.
No problem at all. Good speaking with you, and hope to talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you, Jon.
All right, thanks.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Less House, More Moolah. To access valuable financial tips and resources tailored to your tiny living journey, join our exclusive community at thetinyhouseadvisor.com. Here you'll find a supportive network of like-minded individuals committed to helping each other navigate the challenges and celebrate the victories of embracing a minimalist lifestyle. So don't miss out on the opportunity to be part of this empowering tribe. Be sure to tune in next Thursday for another insightful episode of Less House, More Moolah, where we'll continue to explore practical solutions and inspiring stories to help you create the life you've always dreamed of.
Please see the show notes for important disclosure regarding the Tiny House Advisor LLC and this episode.